Here we go with the first Patreon Q&A series. People send me questions, use the direct message on Discord. I want them basically to be rules questions or rules related procedure questions. My games are obviously candidates, but any game that you confirm with me, I guess, that I know. And often my answer will be kind of like, well, this is kind of what I thought. I'm not claiming to be definitive in these, but to open up as much dialogue as possible. Well, I received a bunch of questions during December, so here I am in the beginning of January recording my responses, and then these go up at the Patreon, and who knows? I'd really like to see this continue. Well, here is a few questions from Ross, and this one concerns Champions Now, which is right here, and this part asks about martial block. Now, martial block is tagged as a defensive action, a defensive maneuver. And this is how any such defensive maneuver works, martial or otherwise, which is that if you name it as your maneuver on your phase, then that means you don't do anything else. You just kind of go into dodge mode or block mode, and any attack that comes at you until your next phase, those numbers will apply. And that's usually not the way they're used, however. I mean, it's sort of like, strike a pose and see if anyone attacks me. That's possible. It's sort of the rules conceptual default of doing it, but the actual play default of doing it is to use a defensive action responsively. So you take some other action during your phase, but when somebody comes in at you with an attack on their own phase, then you name the defensive response, but you have to give up your next phase's action to do it. So that's what you do with dodge. That's what you do with all the various defensive-y things. And the moment that you name it, either on your phase or responsibly, then those numbers apply. So in these cases, now to take it to martial block, first part of the question, the numbers are what apply. You name, okay, he's throwing, he's punching me, so I'm doing my martial block. And you do that. Whatever numbers were in place for offensive and defensive combat value from your last action, whatever was persisting, they would ordinarily persist to your next phase, but you now convert them into these numbers instead. And so you get that big defensive bonus for your martial block now in place. For any other maneuver, you've given up your next phase to do it. For martial block, you don't. It is the creme de la creme of the defensive maneuvers because unlike all the rest of them, you've taken your action on your phase, and then so-and-so comes in with the big-ass punch, and you throw up your martial block, and you get the bonus to your defense from that maneuver. And you've still got your upcoming phase action waiting for you, doable. It doesn't require a roll. None of the defensive actions require a roll. All of them are nothing more nor less than just a shift in the numbers for offense and defense at the time that they are announced. So I hope that makes some sense regarding the martial block. Let's see, is there anything else about that? And so, Ross, you made a couple of guesses that don't really apply. I hope that this explanation has replaced the need to guess. And the only other thing that I have to say about this, oh yes, is what you asked about the ego maneuvers. And ego evade, as well as a couple of others, mind bar, operate in exactly the same way. They are, it says defensive action in the maneuver description, and that means they work exactly as I just described. If you put them up on your own phase, then you don't do anything else. If you do them reactively, then you lose the next action. And they apply um, in terms of their numbers, only 2 ego combat. Now, in terms of giving up the next action and so on, that's a blanket effect. So you can't say, well, I threw up my ego evade, but my next action is a physical attack, so I could just do that, right? And the answer is no. It is a defensive action. Martial block is the privileged one. None of the others are. You threw it up as a responsive thing, and so your next action, whatever it was, is gone. The only good news is that you've got that ego defense rolling in terms of the numbers to your defensive value. Okay. Um, yes, Ross's other question concerns hazards. Now, he's what you say is I'm puzzled by the table of example hazards. Few of the example effects seem to add to 60 points, pending the possibility that there may be errors. I'll dispose of that possibility first. The secret answer is, of course, there may be some mistakes, but a particular one may be that some of the advantages that apply to some of those hazards may have had their values changed during the course of the writing. And so you might be dealing with legacy there in terms of how much they affect the base number of dice points. However, I want to say before we turn to any of that business about mistakes or, design artifacts or anything like that, remember that the area based modifiers, explosion, cones, radius, anything that concerns the area of the attack, of the hazard effect, um, does not count for the points. So if you're going to try to do the math of those hazards, then make sure to omit the advantages that concern the space that it fills, and only look at the other advantages and then see if we're turning out to be 60 points. Because okay, really ought to double check it before making this claim, but I'm pretty sure they do. So hope that answers that issue. All right. Um, who's next? We have a couple of questions from Johan. Now, the first concerns Holmes D&D, and I actually have that right there. And the question reads, how could one handle declaring actions in a separate phase in Holmes D&D, which is mum about it, but may take it for granted? So in other words, Holmes Dungeons and Dragons does not say outright how the people playing declare their characters' actions specifically. Um, the question goes on, I'm aware of how Sorcerer does this, but I have 7 players and combats with tons of different enemies, so I'm worried reaching agreement might take ages. Well, for those of you who don't know, Sorcerer has a phase at the beginning of a round, which basically everybody just says everything that they're up to doing, and it can be revised. It's a kind of a player awareness thing. And the question of whether the character, saw it in time to do it or whatever, we just handle that by looking at the effects of the roll when it hits. So that's fine. And that even includes things like, well, if he comes around the corner, then I'm going to strike him. That's fine. You just handle it when the roll comes. If the eligible condition didn't occur, then you're SOL. It's really easy. But it's one way of doing this. Now, if you go to Holmes D&D, you will find silence on the matter. It just takes it into account that everybody is launching into action. And I will say 2 things about this. First of all, yes, I do think it is very much like Sorcerer, but the more accurately, Sorcerer is like these early games, which all have something of the kind. In, for example, early RuneQuest, everybody just says what they're doing. And then everybody has to calculate what strike rank that's going to land on. And we know that from this moment of everyone initiating, that everybody's in motion. And in fact, you have your strike ranks that you're counting down. So you kind of have a pretty good idea of how far along that person is to, run from here to there. 3/4 of the strike ranks along the way. Well, he's 3/4 of the way there at this particular moment. That's all easy enough. Or is it? What happens when you do have this room full of people, and the room full, it's not just like, the GM nanny. We're talking about this as a group activity. So the room full of people is faced with this question of suddenly everybody having to say what on earth they're doing. Now, question number one is it one of these things where everyone's best off writing it down and then flipping it over? Because, conceptually speaking, because frankly, you really shouldn't know what everyone else is doing. So there's kind of an extra chaos feature going in. Many of these games don't really have the kind of loosey time effects of Sorcerer that allows you to backtrack a little on what happened. Holmes D&D kind of does, though, in its not terribly long, but also not instantaneous combat rounds. There's enough wiggle room in the timing involved to allow for, well, I got this far but didn't make it on a failed roll or something like that. So I think there's a certain amount of flexibility that would allow for everybody just saying what they do, and then they heard what this other guy's going to do, and they say, well, if he's doing that, well, shit, I'm doing this. Fine. Just let that awareness occur. We're dealing with a reasonably substantial combat round in which all of this shit is, landing almost all at once. And the idea that everybody's just launching into what they do with a little bit of perception of what everyone else is doing, insofar as perception allows, that's not that bad. That can be done. It's not even a give. It's compatible with use. It's conceptually fine. Now, the logistics of asking everybody becomes a little bit of an issue. And I say this because, not because, playing D&D is going to solve this, because we all know D&D is, the shit. No, it doesn't. And sadly, play during this period when this game was, released, and even well afterwards, was marked by pretty vituperative arguments. This is the kind of argument where, one 15-year-old jumps up on the sofa, and jumps across your mom's coffee table, across the living room to show that, a guy could jump that far and still, do an axe strike on something. And next thing you know, he's scared the dog and whatever. This kind of argument and the ongoing thing of would have and could have and can and might and all this crap drove a lot of people away from playing D&D. I don't really think it's that much of the fault of the game as such. If you read this and you say, we've all just got to know what everybody's doing, and the best thing to do with this many people is just to do it. You see, what you've got here, you have this interesting phrase. It says, I'm worried reaching agreement. Let's stop right there. I think we can solve this in terms of logistics pretty easily by looking at that phrase and say, what agreement? What agreement? The DM cannot tell the players what their characters do. The players, and this is where it's me saying best practices, the players cannot tell the DM what they can and can't do. Remember, this game is not played on this very detailed map. This game is played very much in a communicated mental space of how it all looks, and with a sketchy, kind of abstraction of it there. And if the DM says, well, actually, that pillar that I just drew is a little circle there. I told you there was a pillar there. Yeah, it goes all the way up to the roof. You guys like, I didn't know that. And he says, well, it does. And this is where I'm saying we don't need agreement if we have our authorities correct. It's non-negotiable. I don't care if he told you now or if he told you 10 seconds ago or a minute ago. The pillar is the way it is. We're done. And so everybody says what they do. If there's some kind of thing that, well, you do understand, you're trying to run through an oil slick there. Um, all those things could be said, but it's not about agreement and should be, I think, kept to what do you do? These are the details of that are relevant. You got this. It's exactly like that second arrow in that pool rolling diagram that I've been flinging around all the time. Just like that second arrow. What do we need to kind of know so that we're all pretty clear when the dice hit the table? But that's not a discussion of what is, or sorry, a discussion of what could or might be or would be or any crap like that. But instead of I say what I'm doing and you say how it is, settled. So Johan's second question in concerns, strangely enough, as I just mentioned, the pool. It says, can a player in the pool attempt any action limited only by his understanding, his own understanding of the genre or plausibility? I got to stop here. Those are contradictory. Can a player in the pool attempt any action? Full stop. Can a player in the pool, are the player's stated actions limited by his own understanding of the genre or plausibility? Well, those are two different things. I mean, if they're limited, then it's not any action. So I think what we're really driving at, I'm going to guess there's a stealth question here. The stealth question is who limits the action stated by the player? Does the player's own understanding of it limit their action and the GM has to kind of take it like it? Or does the GM limit it much in the way that I talked about just now with Holmes and the situation that they're all in? And again, as I have said many times, okay, first of all, I'm going to phrase it like that. That's my understanding of the question. Questions of any action is not of any interest. The question is whether I'm self limiting given my understanding and nobody tells me otherwise, or there is okay, you do have, the authority over how far away that door is and stuff like that. So I will say things and need to ask some questions about it, you know, um, in terms of feasibility too. There are many things at work here that we need to start taking into account. One of them is that the game master always provides one die for minimum to a roll, up to 3, minimum of 1. What this means, and it is a serious meaning, is that in the pool you don't roll for what you can't do. You can't have a roll where the game master says, well, I give you no dice because I think that's like practically impossible. That's just not how it works. If there's nothing in the rules about this, I'm just sort of extrapolating a little bit and then perhaps doing a little game design or text design, I don't know, by saying you roll in the pool when it's feasible in the first place at all. And it is, in fact, situationally up to the GM to say, that isn't feasible. No roll. So that actually backs things up in that question all the way to the beginning of the process. It is not possible for the player to state an action which is deemed by the GM not to be able to work. Period. Then, upon stating an action which the GM finds feasible, then we proceed into how we do it. So I hope you can see that although this sounds dreadfully, I thought this was the freedom game, and you're telling me the DM tells me everything, and I can't unless it pleases the DM. Oh. No, it's just ordinary role playing in most games. No big deal. Try to shoot through the force field. Yeah, that doesn't work. You take it and like it in all these other games. I'm pretty sure you can take it and like it here. So that I think is where that particular question ends for me. Although the question continues with, I've always run it this way. Players might go overboard once or twice, but as they can't hide behind the rules, they'll switch from I'll try to mow down the entire SWAT team to I'll lay down suppressive fire trying to escape. This confused me. I've always run it this way. I have to read this given the question that that's referring to something that Johann had just referred to, but it's not clear what that is. So he ran it in some particular way. And then we see that players might go overboard once or twice, but then it says, as they can't hide behind the rules. I'm not sure what that means. So I'm not sure what this whole part is about. It does imply that there's a self limiting factor in some way, but it's because they, quote, can't hide behind the rules. Don't know what that means. Maybe we're agreeing on this. Maybe what Johann describes about what he does is similar to what I was saying, that the term, any action doesn't mean either any action or any action that you like. So, without consulting the situational authority of the moment, thank you very much. So, all right, I think that I might need some correction or clarification about that in case I misinterpreted.